I'm sitting with an old friend of mine, Bert Van Stolk. And Bert had a unique position in American history, a unique job. He worked in the White House a long time ago. And I want Bert to tell us about what he did in his job, because his boss was the only person in the world to ever order the dropping of an atomic bomb. Who was your boss, Bert?
Harry S. Truman.
Harry Truman, President of the United States.
Absolutely.
And when did you work for him? When were you working in the White House?
It started in the fall of 1951.
Fall of 51. I
Right.
was 2 years old, and I wasn't too much interested in what was going on in world affairs, but you were in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
You were in the Army now.
right. I was in the Army.
What was your rank?
When I first got there, my rank was nothing. I was a private. Yeah.
And then I'm assuming that as a private, you weren't working in the White House, you had another job.
No, what happened, and it's a bit of history, the Korean War was going on. And during the Korean War, there was a draft, and a lot of folks got killed. You may have read some about Pork Chop Hill and various places. Well, there was a sort of a groundswell of let's not kill off America's brains. So at one point, I believe it was an Army regulation, but it was pushed by Congress, and it's basically said no graduate in engineering, physics, or chemistry shall be sent to the front line unless his specific skills are needed, which left me out, and I was an engineer.
That was my next question. You were an engineer.
Yeah.
Where did you go to school?
I started out at Rensselaer Polytechnic, which is in Troy, New York, and transferred to McGill University in Montreal.
Now, you have an accent, and it doesn't sound much like the Bronx. What is your accent?
It's Dutch.
Dutch. Okay.
Okay.
So where were you born?
I was born in Rotterdam.
Okay. And then how old were you when you got to the United States?
I was 18 when I arrived in the United States.
And that accent, and you're over 18 now, so that accent has been with you all of these decades.
Well, I think my English may have gotten better from the time I was 18.
When you got your degree, did you enlist or get drafted?
No, I got drafted.
So you got drafted, and where did they send you?
Well, they obviously sent me where they sent everybody else. They sent you to basic training. It happened to be Fort Dix, New Jersey.
All right, and after you went to basic training, they figured...
It was during basic training that this order came out. So most of the boys was shipped to Korea, and I was not.
Because of your education?
Because of my education. And there were several others, and they shipped us to Washington, and frankly, they didn't know what to do with us at one point.
Did you go to Fort Belvoir? Where did you go?
No, we went to, it was called Fort Myers, Virginia, just outside the Pentagon.
Right.
And for a while I had a very dull job.
Doing what?
Well, it was in the Signal Center. They assigned us to the Signal Corps. And if I'm allowed to say this, I think I was sort of fixing radios for colonels' mistresses. It was that sort of thing.
That's our secret, okay?
Yeah, that's our
Stays
secret.
between the two of us.
Yeah.
Okay, now you had an electrical engineering degree?
Yes. So I could put a cord on a radio, you know.
So these guys were happy to have you do that job. How long were you doing that job?
Not very long. What happened was my wife, now my late wife, and I got engaged that fall, and she had a good job. She had a job in New York City, and she didn't particularly want to quit her job. So I started looking around and see if I could wangle a transfer
to New York City.
To New York City. So did that, and I found somewhat, the only thing I could find in New York City was Governor's Island. They had a recruiting service there. I met a major who was very, very helpful, and he helped me write a letter and had his secretary type it for me. And I handed it to my company commander asking for a transfer to New York.
Sounds easy enough. You went?
No.
Of course not.
Of course not. My company commander said, I have to warn you that you're in the Signal Corps and you're asking for a transfer to another branch of the Army. This means that any officer in the Signal Corps will have prior claim to your services, and that might include Korea. So I thought this was the usual Army BS, and I said, I'll take that chance, sir. He said, okay, and he signed it. And then it was 2 days later that I got this telephone call that I'll never forget. It was the Master Sergeant back at the Fort Myers where I stayed, and said, Van, get your butt over to the White House. I said, the what? He says, you know that place on Pennsylvania Avenue? And I said, how do I get there? He said, I don't care. Use your car, walk, pogo stick. I couldn't care less. You're supposed to be there, and you're supposed to be there by 11 o'clock this morning. That was what happened.
So you went to the White House?
So I got in my car and I drove to the front gate. I wasn't given any instructions.
No.
And somebody obviously stopped the car and asked if they could help me. And I said, yes, I'm supposed to see, and I was given a name, I'm supposed to see a Major McNally. Oh, in that case, can we park your car for you? Etc. So then they took me in, and I met the major who was head of the White House Signal Detachment. And he was very pleasant, and he said he'd seen my, it's called the MO in the Army, he'd seen my MO, and
military occupation.
Yeah, correct. And he said, I hope you're going to enjoy our company and vice versa. And that was it.
So
he didn't ask me whether I wanted to or not. I mean, this is it. Yeah.
So you got your orders, you went to the White House. Where was your office? Where were you working? What were you doing?
It was on the, what do they call it, the West Wing.
Well, it had to be the West Wing, because at this time, weren't they redoing the White House?
Yeah.
Weren't they remodeling it?
That's right. They sure were. The president did not live there.
He lived across the street in the Blair House.
Correct. But the offices were still, the Oval Office was open.
He had to walk across the street every day?
Right, yeah, he did, indeed. The basic idea was that whatever the president said officially was supposed to be recorded, whether it was a press conference or Ladies' Aid Society or Boy Scouts of America, doesn't matter, but whatever he said officially, they wanted recorded, and they wanted under their control, not have CBS or NBC do it. So we did it.
Who's we?
We as a group did. And McNally, who later became a colonel, it was a little funny to have a company commander who was a colonel, not that he got to be a colonel, and he came out of the Secret Service. And apparently he had some technical know-how, and he organized this thing, and they gave him a commission, and eventually became a colonel.
So you arrived there in the fall of '51.
Yeah.
And you've never been in the White House before, like most of us.
No.
So you're kind of learning your way around. You're a little bit lost. You say, what do I do? What's my job? Where do I go to work?
There was this office, and there was McNally, and there was Major Biggs, who was an Air Force officer, and what was his name? Captain, whatever his name was. Will come to me. And a sergeant and a couple of enlisted men, and we were supposed to use a tape recorder, and they were big things, as you recall, with two reels on them, that sort of thing. So, and it took
Back then, you told me once it was a two-man job.
It was a two-man job to carry it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a long time before Nixon was able to hide those things. Okay.
Yeah. So when they wanted you to do your job, what did President Truman say?
Oh boy.
Did he say send for the boys? How did he say it?
No. As far as one of the early things I remember where there's some structure to it were the press conferences. And there were quite a few of them. And the signal boys, or whatever you call it, the president used to call us the boys, but we were there and we set up the microphones and what have you. And we were supposed to record whatever was said during these press conferences. So that was, and there was a known format to that. They were very different, incidentally, of today's press conferences. Eisenhower changed it totally. After Eisenhower, it became more of a scripted thing. During the President Truman's days, it was invariably off the record. It was confidential. And
even though you were recording it, it was still off the record?
It was confidential. And what happened was everybody who was there was accredited. I mean, they may have worked for CBS or NBC, but they were accredited. They had a clearance, and they all played the game. They did not publish anything until it got released. And the president's press secretary was the one who had the final word and said, yes, you can release this, or we're going to change this, etc. In my memory, certainly what the president said was much more spontaneous than ever after, because Eisenhower made the thing public and had immediate TV feeds and all that kind of stuff. And it's been that way ever since. So that's why a press conference now, if you look at it, it's pretty scripted.
Who they choose, the question that's asked.
That's right.
It's all planned.
It's planned. And it wasn't in those days.
Right.
No.
And Truman was unique in the sense that since 1900, he was the only president that didn't go to college. He was the only president that didn't graduate with a degree. And here he was talking to you, having you work for him, and like you say, it wasn't planned. No. He said what he felt. He said,
this is true, he said what he felt, but he was an amazing guy. He was elected to be an officer in his regiment that went over to France during the First World War. Now, that doesn't happen anymore in the U.S. Army, but he was a National Guard guy who was elected to be an officer. And he deserved to be an officer. And he was able to keep up with drunken sergeants and God knows what. He did a very, very good job. So the fact that he had not a lot of formal education, there was no doubt about it. This guy was smart and was a leader, right, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. And history bears that out.
I think so, yeah.
The further we've gotten away from his presidency,
right,
the more we've respected him and the more we appreciate all the great things that he's done,
right,
over the years. So what was it like being in a press conference with the president, and as I said, the only man that ever ordered the dropping of the atomic bomb? That amazes me. You were how old, 21?
51. No, I was more. I was born 27, so I was 24.
24 years old,
yeah.
And you find yourself working for this man. How was it working for him? Did you ever address him? Did you ever talk to him?
Yeah, well, I talked to him, but only in the line of duty. Right. Of course, the kind of thing that happened in those days, you run out of tape. So then what you do is you hold up your hand, and he would recognize me. And then I said, Mr. President, I'm running out of tape. Whereupon he said, okay, boys. And then he'd stop, tell a couple of
Indiana yesterday was a humdinger, a nice-looking red-headed reporter. Gave me the most innocent, steady-faced look, asked me a question from full of dynamite. You got the same answer?
So when you held up your hand, the most powerful man in the world stopped talking.
Absolutely.
Now maybe you're the most powerful man in the world, and we just don't want to admit it.
No, but this brings up another memory which happened about a year and a half later. I was in the Pentagon, and a Marine colonel asked me to take a press conference of the Army, Navy, whatever group. And I was taken up to this particular office in the Pentagon, and there was a lieutenant colonel, I think, who was going to give the press conference. And we did the same thing you were doing. We were trying to test out the equipment before we started. And this guy stood way too close to the microphone. And so I got up and I said, "Sir, you have to take a couple steps backwards." Before I got anywhere to him, I was sort of tackled by a sergeant and a lieutenant. I said, "What's going on?" So, "Well, you don't talk to the colonel, you talk to the sergeant will talk to to the lieutenant, and the lieutenant will talk to the colonel." And at that time I said, "I can ask the President of the United States to take a step backwards."
Right.
Yeah.
If I can talk directly to the president,
Yeah.
I can talk to you guys.
No, that's
Yeah.
right. But that's also typical of the president wasn't worried about his position, but the colonel was, you know.
It just seems kind of strange that you
It
had
is strange.
access to the President of the United States, Harry Truman, and yet you didn't have that access to the Colonel.
No.
Living in D.C. back in the early 50s, did you ever get to see or even meet J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI?
No. He still had a very good name at that time. It was before it became known that he had a file on everybody. The fact that he was a known homosexual, etc. All that stuff he was still sort of on a pedestal at that time. Right. As far, no, I did not meet him. The people I saw, I did sort of physically see and sometimes talk to in the washroom or something, were all those generals, you know, like Eisenhower, obviously, although Eisenhower and Truman didn't get on with that well. But
you got to see
Omar Bradley.
Oh, really?
You know, all those guys.
So wait a minute, you're telling me that you got to talk and walk and go to the restroom?
Men in the restroom always talk. I know about ladies, but men in the restroom always talk.
I met Bob Hope in a restroom.
Yeah, right.
From
Yeah.
here. I mean, we had a nice conversation.
Yeah.
That happens.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
But you got to do that? You got to talk to Omar Bradley?
People like that, you know.
How about Secretary of State George Marshall? Did you ever meet him?
I think he was gone. I think he had resigned. Yeah, George Marshall was no longer Secretary of State.
Did you ever get to meet Vice President Alvin Barkley?
Yes, yeah.
Now, how far was your office from the Oval Office? It couldn't have been too far.
It wasn't too far.
Because you had to be within quick walking distance and carrying that device.
Well, the press conference was never held in the Oval Office. You know, there's a building, a Rococo building directly west.
The Executive Office building.
The Executive Office building. And that's where we had several press conferences. If they were bigger, they were there.
A little street. It's not
Right,
even a
right.
street,
That was a little street, and that's where cars were parked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the Vice President has his office, and maybe not.
Maybe not then, but yeah.
But so you simply had to walk over there. The President would come over there.
The President would come over there.
Because that building is directly across from the Blair House, where he was living at that time.
Right,
So,
exactly. The thing I remember is we were just married. We got married, and we lived in Washington. And I remember coming home, and you know, my wife, who was Charlotte, was interested, obviously, in what I was doing, and she said, "What happened today?" And I said, "I knocked down the president."
You what?
I knocked down the president.
Why would you do something like that?
She said, "What?" I said, "Well, I had these cables under my arms, and I was trying to wire up the Oval Office, because this was the Oval Office we had to go into. And Mr. Truman was on one of his walks, and I got there, and I had these cables under my arm, and was sort of charging into the Oval Room, and we collided."
Are you serious?
Yeah, absolutely. And Charlotte said, "Well, what did he say?" I said, "Well, we hugged each other," and the president said, "Oopsie." So that's kind of conversation you would get between the likes of me and the likes of him.
You should consider yourself lucky that he didn't have a spare atomic bomb. Because, I mean, a guy like you running into the most powerful man in the world, it would just seem, I would think that even the Secret Service would jump on you, that they would, maybe they weren't even around.
They weren't around.
Just you and the president.
Yeah, they weren't
What a
around.
unique position.
Well, I mean, I think the White House is pretty well secured. I mean, It probably still is.
Oh, even more so.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
more so. They're
Right.
all over the rooftop with.
Oh, yeah.
with all
Well,
the equipment.
well, don't forget there's actually was some clown shooting at him at the Blair House as well as in Congress.
The 2 Puerto Rican men.
That's right. That's right.
Now you were around. You were there for that.
Yeah, I wasn't
You were
in the
there,
street.
but you were
Yeah,
part of the,
yes,
White House
yes,
team at
yes,
that time, yeah.
yes. No, the security, obviously, they did the best they could, but it was a totally different level, as you say, than we have now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad.
As a matter of fact, back then there wasn't even a 3rd floor in the White House. They added that when they made the White House stronger. So there had to be so much activity. It was a huge construction project as far as you're concerned. You had to stay away from that part of it because they totally gutted it and just left the walls.
Yeah, and I would say that was probably secured pretty well. I don't think a construction guy could walk into the Oval Office the way I could. No, I don't.
Did you get to see the construction of the White House? Did you get to see the interior, what it looked like when they were putting up the steel girders and the steel beams to hold the floors?
I did not, but I suppose I could have, but it.
You were too busy.
I was too busy, and I also, too anxious to go home afterwards, that sort of thing.
What, do you remember where you lived? Where was your home in
Yes, we were in the northeast section, and it was a neighborhood going down pretty rapidly. It was just right behind the Capitol, and we just had a room on the 3rd floor.
Do you remember there was a place called the U-Line Arena? U-Line Arena, which was at M Street and 9th or maybe 13th, and that was in the northeast section. It was a huge arena that was in this neighborhood right next to the train tracks. And I'm wondering if you lived over there.
Yeah, we were close to the train tracks. I don't remember the arena. And after that,
behind Union Station.
Yeah. After that, we were very, very lucky. We saw an ad in the paper saying that someone in Chevy Chase was looking for a house sitter. And, I had very little money, and so we went to see this guy, and he was a professor he was white, but he was a professor at Howard, and his wife was a writer of some sort. They're very nice people. And they gave us an hour interview, and they decided they like us. And so we moved into Chevy Chase, and we had a lovely house in Chevy Chase. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And
Even
we weren't paid, but the rent was a joke. They had a summer house in on Lake Champlain, and they took very, professors do this. They took long vacations, and they wanted their house safe, and they liked Charlotte, and that was it. So we had this one. We really lucked out for a young couple.
Oh, well, right now, of course, there's the subway, the metro you can get around on. But back then, you had to drive to the White House.
Yes, that's right.
So you drove from Chevy Chase and you parked in the White House parking lot?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, I did.
Here, Jennington, here's my keys. And you
Right.
gave them to the valet and you walked into your job.
That's right.
What was your rank?
Oh, that was funny. One morning I walked in and I addressed our company commander. It was Colonel McNally, and the sergeant tried to sort of run interference, and he said, "You're supposed to talk to me first." And McNally said, "Oh, come on, Van, what's your problem?" I said, "Well, I need more money. I don't. The stripes you can have. I'm not interested, but."
The sergeant didn't like you going outside of the chain of command.
Well, of course, he didn't. He also felt he had to say it, but it was a small inner group that we all belonged to it.
Yeah.
So McNally said, what can I do for you? I said, I need a promotion. I don't care about the stripes, but I need a promotion. I need the money. We can't live here with, what it was, $110 a month or something.
Wow.
It wasn't good.
You couldn't get on a bus now up in D.C.
That's right,
That's
exactly.
amazing.
So, and he was, he agreed. So the following thing happened. He said, well, I can promote you to PFC today, and don't put the stripe on, because I think in 2 weeks I'll make you a corporal. And that's exactly what he did. And our salary more than doubles, and we got, quarters at the convenience of the government, so that added another, we went from $110 to like $400 or $500. I mean, it was way, way up very fast. So
you're now able to
live normally,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
It has to be a very unique experience, particularly with the access that you had to the president, and considering the fact that just a little while before that, you wanted to get out, you wanted to go to New York City, you didn't care anything about this army or the career, you were serving your time, and you didn't want to be there, and suddenly you're at the top of the ladder, you're at the top of the chain, working for the commander-in-chief, and you can hold up your hand and tell him to stop speaking. This is a complete turnaround.
Well, I didn't look at it that way.
Well, perspective now
yeah.
gives you a different view.
Yeah, well, that's no, I did not look at it that way. And it is, I was more surprised. I once made an error in driving in Washington, and I was stopped by a cop, and I think I had some kind of ID on me, and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, that's all right. Just be careful." I had the one thing, and this is a story I like to tell, because there's sometimes in one's life when you everything just goes perfectly right. I was doing some work for the White House in the Pentagon, and I picked up the paper, and the headline was, "Queen of the Netherlands visits Washington on a state visit." So I picked up the phone and got the colonel on the phone, and I said, "Do you need me?" No, what I said, I was, there's a little levity there. I said, "Colonel, it looks like my queen is visiting your president." And then I said, "Do you need me?" And he said, "No." He says, "Why don't you take the afternoon off and, go over the airport, see what's going on." So I decided to take his word. After all, he was my boss. So I called the motor pool in the Pentagon and said, "When you have transport leaving for, what was it called? Matt's Terminal in those days." There was the airport in nearby, MATS, Matt's Air Force Base. They told me there was the transport would leave at 2:00 from the mall entrance. So I was there 5 minutes to 2, and there was a station wagon with the regular stars that they had in those days, and there was a driver. And I opened the door, beside the driver, said, "You're going to Matt's Terminal?" And he said, "Yes." So I sat in beside him, and pretty soon this whole bunch of guys came down the stairs there, and there was a Navy lieutenant commander and an Air Force captain and a Marine master sergeant, and they all had blue armbands on with press. I love this story. And so did the driver. So we all got there, and obviously this lieutenant commander was in charge, and he looked around, and he saw me, and I was sitting in the front seat, and he said, "Corporal," and I looked around, and I said, "Sir?" He said, "Corporal, you don't have a blue press armband on." I said, "No, sir." "Well, we are going to Matt's Terminal." I said, "Yes, sir." "The President of the United States is going to be there." I said, "Yes, sir." "Well, we're all supposed to have blue armbands on." I said, "Well, sir, I don't think there'll be any difficulty." "Well, don't tell me I didn't warn you." I said, "No, sir." Okay. So we got to Matt's Terminal, and of course we're stopped. So those are the days of this manual window. I crank down the window. The guy puts his hand on my shoulder and say, "Hey, Van, who are these characters with you?"
You didn't need the armband, and you knew
No,
the person.
no, of course.
You know who you were driving.
Yeah, that's right. So that was this makes you feel like you really belong, doesn't it? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So
And then once you got inside, nobody questioned you. Nobody.
No.
Nobody. Everybody knew who you were.
Well, that was another thing, and I think you learn on a thing like that. I noticed that the Secret Service people were not interested in me. They weren't interested in anybody they knew. They were interested in people they didn't know. And I could walk anywhere, cross any line. It didn't matter, because to them I was invisible. And I think I sort of put that a little bit into practice the day Eisenhower was discharged, and this was again at the Pentagon. There was a large crowd trying to get a view of him. And then somebody said he was going to come out of one of the underground things. And people started running towards where they could look down. And I remember never running so fast in my life and getting over there and said, "You cannot go here." The last thing I wanted is somebody throwing a brick at Eisenhower, So, and I was immediately joined by Secret Service people. We all did the same thing. We didn't talk to each other. We knew what to do, and we kept that crowd back. It's interesting how I was never given any course in this, but it becomes part of your second nature in those days. So, yeah, that's just something that happened. Yeah. I don't want to get on that. I think the job of president is totally impossible. You need a gigantic ego, and you need to. The job is really three jobs. It is the king function. The Ladies' Aid Society, the cutting of ribbons is one. The other one is being the head of the party. And the third one is trying to run the country. I mean, this is a job for more than three people.
So you're saying the ceremonial, the political, and then really being the commander-in-chief.
Exactly. This is an impossible job.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can get any sleep at all, do you? I mean...
No.
No, it's an awful job. They all turn gray, have you noticed?
Oh, yeah. They go rather quickly.
Rather quickly, that's right.
Yeah, mine took a long time.
And I think some of it could be ameliorated by a constitutional amendment. I think those guys should be elected for 5 or 6 years and not be allowed to run a second term. One term. One longer term, at odds, if possible, with the Senate and the House. So don't get also, the 2-year or the 6-year thing. Keep it at odds. But otherwise, just give them one longer term and don't make them worry about the next election during the 3rd year of the first term. It's awful. So.
And that happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
So. Am I preaching a revolution?
No, but I want to hear it. I want to hear your thoughts because of the fact that, one, of your perspective, and two, because of your position 60 years ago, where you were, what you did. It was so unique.
Yeah, of course.
The fact that you worked for this man. Working for a president is something unusual, but working for the only man who was compelled to end the war under the terms
Well, of course, I feel that you younger people are a little stuck on that. I think if you were able to roll back the clock and have us all stand around in 1945, I think there would have been several million people in the United States who would have said, push the button. That was not... The anti-nuke thing came later. And I think we're over for it. I mean, damn it. Finish this war. We didn't know how bad an atom bomb was.
I'm not disputing that, yeah.
Neither did Truman.
I don't think he had a choice. He had no choice.
He had no choice. And what's more, as far as I know, FDR had not even put him in the loop.
He was not.
He was not in the loop till FDR was dead. And then he had to be briefed by all those other people.
He was only there 82 days, and he didn't have a clue.
That's correct.
Most of the things that
So I think to blame President Truman is nonsense.
I'm not blaming him. I'm saying this man had to do.
He had to do it, but I don't think he had a choice. And I think based on what he knew, I'm sure I would have made the same decision. I'm sure you would have too.
Yeah. One bomb was reserved for the Germans, and of course the first bomb was reserved for the Japanese. But after Germany surrendered, we had the second bomb,
right?
And the Japanese refused to surrender after the first bomb.
I bet that or the communications was compromised. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know. The one time I changed the evidence, we went to, I think it was the Mayflower Hotel, for a breakfast with the cartoonist, and Mr. Truman was a great, he admired especially Al Cap. He liked him. And there was this cartoonist breakfast, and he was invited, and he went. And so we went there with our equipment and recorded it. And it was not a high-level thing. It wasn't particularly political. And at any rate, I remember I was alone in the White House office when the phone rang. And it was Joe Short, who was the press secretary at the time. And he said, you can release the tape to the news services, CBS, NBC, Mutual, whatever they were in those days. And it was ABC, NBC, CBS, that was the Mutual Broadcasting Corporation, I remember. And I said, okay. And then I said, wait a minute, I have a top secret clearance, and I'm going to listen to that tape. Well, I'd listen to the tape anyway, I recorded it. I said, I'm going to listen to this tape before I release it. So I listened to it, and sure enough, there was, I don't know what was it, there was something in my head. I said, this didn't sound quite right. So somebody asked some kind of a very leading question, and I heard Truman say, Joe, you damn well know I wouldn't do a thing like that. Got a pair of scissors, I cut out the dam. It never saw the light of day.
Oh, wow, so you saved the president a little bit of...
Absolutely. I mean, there's some lady in Peoria sitting there, getting all upset. So I took the dam out. Well, it might have been a goddamn, but at any rate, it had to be taken out.
So Harry...
And Short missed it. And I didn't. So...
That's funny. That's cute.
Well, it shows you, again, you're part of a team.
Well, I was going to say you were a team player.
Yeah.
Yeah? You did what you had to do to protect him, but there was nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, it would have been the best thing to do, the proper thing to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What can I say?
Your conscience after all these years, you can...
No, I've not lost sleep over that. No. The story about the elevator was that's when we were in the office building of the whatever you gave it a name.
Executive office.
Which used to be the old State Department before, and at any rate, we were there and trying to move into the elevator, which was a fairly small, rickety thing with one of those pancake things, You remember them?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. At any rate. The president appeared, so everybody backed out. And I think I was already in the elevator, and I had all this equipment. So he came in, and they closed the door, and off we went. And there was an elevator operator. He was a wizened, elderly African-American. And he looked around. No, there were two of us, and two of us soldiers were there. And he said... So he said, good morning, boys, and we said, good morning, sir. And then he looked at the operator, and he said, good morning, Joe, right? Yes, sir, Mr. President. So, Joe, your wife, Martha, She has bad arthritis, doesn't she? Yes, sir, Mr. President. So, well, did General Graham get those pills to you? Oh, yes, sir, Mr. President. She's feeling much better. And this actually happens, and I think it showed how plugged in he was to the lower echelons and helping them if possible, you know. I know he was sort of saying, yeah, it's Joe, isn't it? You know, that sort of thing. And I don't know whether his name was Joe. Maybe he just said, yes, sir. Who knows? But
that was something, the fact that he, because of his access to any medicine,
right,
made sure that his medical people got
the
elevator operators.
Right. That's right. So that was sort of a personal experience I had with him.
Yeah.
Which is probably never written up.
No, that kind of thing is good to hear. And matter of fact, didn't he invite you to come visit him if you ever came to that part of the country?
Well, that's one thing that has nothing to do with the president. It's my blame because I later got a job where I traveled all over the country, and I was in Kansas City a number of times. And I should have taken a couple hours to go and see the old man, and I didn't.
Yeah.
But you're young, and you're busy, and you want to get home, or there's one more lunch to go to, and all that kind of stuff.
And you'll do it next time.
You'll do it next time. Right, exactly.
But what I'm saying is you have the invitation to stop by and see him.
Yes, I mean, the invitation that it was understood that anybody who had worked there would be welcome.
Yeah.
This was what I did in the Army, and to have to go to a New Year's party rather than go to New York and visit my wife's family in New York was nonsense. I mean, why should I go? I see those people every day. Why go to the reception for the staff?
Now, what kind of a party are you talking about?
The New Year's reception for the staff.
What year was this? Do you remember New Year's?
That must have been New Year's 52.
Okay.
And it must have been New Year's 52 because
it was after
52, 53.
It was after the election, and he wasn't coming back.
No, that was 52, 53. This must have been New Year's 51, 52, and I was pretty new, and I didn't feel like going. And the second New Year's reception, your sister Emmy was about to be born. Charlotte was like this because she was born the 16th of January. My last day in the Army. Okay.
So you're on your way out of the White House. Truman's on his way out of the White House.
Yeah, I was out of the White House 2 days or 3 days before he was. Yeah. That's right.
As Mrs. Truman and I leave the White House, we have no regret. We feel we have done our best in the public service. I hope and believe we have contributed to the welfare of the nation and to the peace of the world. And now the time has come for me to say good night.
So you had other things on your mind.
Absolutely.
Rather than go to parties.
Right. So that's really, obviously knowing what I know now, I would have gone. I should have gone, but I didn't. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time,
Yeah, well, it's your perspective on it back then. But looking back 60 years ago, you would have loved to have gone, and you probably would have even asked me if I was available. I'd have gone with you.
Of course.
Yes. Thanks. Yeah. I appreciate the offer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's good to be back home in what I call the center of the world, Independence, Missouri.